is the Building the World. This is the Building the World House panel focusing on Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Desi voices and leaders. At the center of this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s idea of the World House, in which he says it is about a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never live apart, must somehow learn to live with each other in peace. And so we're focusing this conversation on how people can build and inhabit the world interdependently and with mutual responsibility. The Building the World House is a panel discussion that furthers Dr. King's vision of pluralism. Each panel focuses on a particular cultural or social identity while representing various religious, spiritual, and secular worldviews from within the community. Ooh, someone has a dog. Welcome. We love puppies in the space. This is an opportunity to engage with puppies and people with interfaith and intersectional voices about what builds and sustains a thriving, equitable, peaceful, and inclusive society. This panel is being organized by the United Religion Initiative's North America Regional Office in partnership with the University of Laverne. Specifically Zandra's office, the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, with support from the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles and Interfaith America. My name is Damairis Lao. I have the honor of being your moderator today. I am a proud descendant of refugees from Southeast Asia, identify as queer, and I was raised in a Buddhist household in a Christian majority community, and it exposed me to the need for interfaith cooperation very early on. Besides that, I graduated from the University of Laverne in 2019, and I worked at the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and I currently work at Pitzer College. Today, I am just focused on this panel. This is my dream panel. These are my dream panelists because of the expansiveness of their knowledge and the way that they're present and they inhabit and embrace themselves unapologetically. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our lovely panelists for the evening. First up, we have Devin Barney. Devin Barney is an early career advocate and scholar at the intersection of community, cultural, and developmental psychology. Using community-based participatory research and activity settings approaches, they have studied, evaluated, and collaborated on projects and community actions across broad topics, including individual quality of life, sustainability of meaningful daily routines / occupation, families' navigation of diverse cultural values in multicultural spaces, and personal / community empowerment. In their current role as the project manager of Imoyeshe Community Support Services, Devin partners with several entities to build organizational capacity and evaluate positive youth development programming of community-based nonprofits in Los Angeles County. Welcome to the space, Devin. Our next panelist is Tasneem Noor. She is the program co-director for New Grounds, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. Raised in Pakistan, India, and Dubai, she is an interfaith minister in residence with the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, an award-winning author and founder of Noor Enterprises, Soulful Transformations, offering personal development and opportunities for meaningful dialogue. Welcome to the space, Tasneem. Our last panelist of the day is Kolini Coleman. Kolini is a queer Native Hawaiian and Samoan activist, academic, and proud product of her community. Her professional and academic trajectory was driven by her passion for community-oriented and student-centered practices. She currently serves as the Director of Student Services at Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science, and oversees the Career Center, Student Health and Wellness Services, and Engagement Initiatives. Recently, Kolini practices self-care by not talking about Bruno, convincing loved ones to be four townies, and playing video games. Welcome to the space, Kolini. So the first question that I have for you all today, and I hope you're ready for it, is who are you? Who are you really? who are the people that you've been and the people that you are now, and what do you see for the trajectory of your life? Let's start with Devin, then go to Tasneem, and then Kolini.
Sure. Thank you so much, Damairis, for leading us through this discussion, and thank you all for hosting us and making space. What a big question, right? I like talk about this question often with my own therapist, and I was invited to write a book chapter on this, and I have just almost no idea. I think you'll notice in my introduction, I don't really mention a lot about who I am. I talk about what I do, right? And that's sort of the through line of my experience, is that I own, I'm a human doing. I'm very good at that. But the human being part, a little bit shifty, and I have a complex sort of cultural history. I'm Indonesian in terms of my family background, but even that, that's 17,000 islands of different cultural groups. My family comes from different kind of cultural experiences, as well as Papua New Guinea in that, right? So understanding that is one piece, right? I'm also queer, and I grew up largely within the Southern Midwest. And so understanding and situating that particular experience amongst a group of folks that don't necessarily welcome or identify with that, also causes this sort of displacement. So who am I? I'm just a giant work in progress that is just here to do my best, to live and love, and that's sort of where I come from. Where I'm heading, I also don't know, but so long as I continue, to kind of, convene and commune with, like-minded folks, then I think I'm doing all right. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Devin, for the human being and the human doing. I like that. I'm going to take that forward with me. Human doing. Actually, I'll stick with the human being part, because I think so I came to United States, I immigrated to United States as a 15-year-old. And before I came here, I was a daughter, a sister, a student, a niece, a granddaughter, a cousin. All those familial roles, I think, described who I was. And I really didn't have a sense of my own identity as Tasneem. And when I came here as a 15-year-old, I was constantly that's something of very American value, is it's more individualistic than communal. And so immediately people were asking me, what do you like? What do you do? What do you think? And it was the first time I really had to find myself. And so I've been on that journey intentionally since since I was 15. And so I am Tasneem. My name is from the Quran. It's the name of the sweet drink in heaven. So I hope to enjoy it someday myself with you all. I'm Muslim, so I think my Muslim identity is core. And when I say I'm Muslim, it's my relationship with God. It's my outlook on life, which be it with compassion, with mercy, with curiosity, a value for pluralism. I'm Desi, and I think that's why I'm on this panel today. So my dad is Indian, my mom is Pakistani. I've lived in both countries, and I don't like to choose. I can get technical and say I'm more Pakistani than Indian, but I really feel a close affinity to both cultures and countries. And so I really honor the Desi community, and it actually speaks powerfully of my family heritage and how we came to be in India or Pakistan, and the different ways my family connects to that. I'm American. I love being an American Muslim. I think American Muslim probably defines me more than being a Desi Muslim, to be honest. And that's something we can probably dive into. And other than that, I'm always in search of finding the little Tasneem inside of me, because I feel like I grew up too fast and didn't get to enjoy that childhood and just be silly and, just jump around and be that kid. So I'm always searching and welcoming the little Tasneem in me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. That's a big question. And it's funny because a good majority of my professional trajectory as a career advisor was helping students answer this question, but we're very real because this question, the answer to this question changes every single time. So I guess simplicity, I'm the only girl in a family of 4 boys, and I'm also one of the older siblings. So at a very young age, I was taught to be assertive, but also warm and welcoming. Being the only girl, there were all those pressures that were put on to me. And before leaving to my 3rd grade class, it was a reminder of, don't forget, you have everyone behind you coming up, so you can't mess up. So keep on going. I love you, but don't mess up. And that's a lot of pressure on a 3rd grader. And even till now, I'm working on deconstructing that pressure, but that sense of I need to go out there, I need to support my community was instilled in me at a very young age. And I'm grateful to be at a point where I can truly live those words and not feel like I have to do it out of other people's obligations or expectations. It's been a privilege to share this space and to go through this journey of identifying who I am and how that changes. It's changed within the last few years. Before the pandemic, I was very work-centered of like, nope, we have to meet these deadlines. This has to happen. I have to respond to this email yesterday. And then after the pandemic, it's like, you know what? You are going to get that email when you get that email. And that's also how I've been with my teams. We're very understanding that human part, like you mentioned earlier, Devin, that human part has always been removed. So when I was fortunate enough to be elevated to this role, I made sure to put that right back. So we're very big on mental health in that space. We're very big on reclaiming healthy narratives, healthy ways of being our most authentic self, because we know that if we are able to walk our truths, it's an example of how our students can walk their own truths as well. So as far as my trajectory, I'm still figuring it out. If there's a job out there that will pay me to just travel and sleep, I will slip you my resume and just let me know what that looks like. But regardless, I will always follow whatever makes me happy, whatever makes me feel wholesome, and that's where you'll find me in my trajectory.
Yeah, I agree. Kolini, if you ever need a personal assistant when you find that job, let me know. I would love to help you. This is a great job right now because I just get to ask like thoughtful questions and get like amazing answers back. This is the easiest thing I've ever done. Next question, folks, is that our overlapping identities often make it challenging to be able to show up as our full selves. When have you felt like you most belonged? In what situations have you felt excluded, and how has it shaped your identity? Or how has it shaped your definition of what a community looks like to you? And in this, for this question, let's go in the order of Tasneem, Kolini, and then Devin.
Cool. Thank you for the great questions, the thoughtful ones. So sorry, say your question one more time so I can really lean into it versus.
Fantastic. Yeah, no. So the question is, when have you felt like you most belonged? And then on the contrary, when have you felt excluded? And how have those experiences shaped your idea of what a community is? Especially when we're talking about building the world house. What does the world house in your practical life, what has it looked like?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
As I mentioned, coming here as a 15-year-old and being asked, who are you kind of questions in different ways, and then going to college and really discovering myself, I really flourished in the spaces, the social justice spaces, and the facilitated spaces that gave me prompts and people and stories so I could start to grapple with these questions. And I really appreciated all of those spaces. But to be honest, it was after college. There's the organization that I now work for is the organization I did their fellowship back in 2009, 2010. And it's particularly for Muslims and Jews. And so it's that kind of a social justice-y space, but focused on the Muslim Jewish identity. And I didn't realize until I was in New Ground that that part of my identity was missing in college and student affairs. And, when I was working with students, there was no space for me to really explore and express my own Muslim identity. And even the Asian, Desi identity, there was some space for it, but the Muslimness was really lacking because people were afraid of how to talk about it without getting into the concerns around Islamophobia, and I don't want to be offensive, I don't want to be intrusive of your, by asking too many questions, like that kind of a thing. So what I love about New Ground and why I feel it's my place of belonging is it really is a space where people can be themselves. It is this kind of a community where thoughtful questions can be asked without the fear of judgment or shame. And we can be ourselves. Like I remember one year, a fellow, she was in transition with her Jewish identity, and she'd been more secular and was looking to explore if she should take back her Jewish name on again. And she tried that on, and she said, outside of this space, if you call me by this name, you might get weird looks of who are you talking to, but in this space, I'd like to be called this way. Pronouns are welcome, names are welcome. We get to define our own terms and describe what that means and why they matter. So when you're talking about difficult things like Israel and Palestine and anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, like that freedom and that space and that forgiveness to be able to define our own terms is really powerful. So these are some of the elements that I think create the world house and creates a space of belonging for me personally. And I do my best to create that for others. A time when I felt excluded, I can go back to high school, but I think I'll keep it more recent and say recently I was there was a conference and there was a keynote, like a panel for the keynotes, like plenary panel. And I saw my name on that panel and I wasn't asked, I wasn't invited. And it was just like, oh, you're doing this. And it was a moment of exclusion for me because it really had me think about, wait, one, what is my place here where I'm just being expected to do something? How do I really want to show up here? And do I even want to show up here? And so it really was, I think the exclusion came from that space of not seeing the human beingness, not like, just courtesy. Just as having the expectations that I'll just be there and perform in a certain way. So in case you're curious, I declined that and I didn't show up. I mean, I told them I wouldn't show up. So I was, but I think that was the moment for me.
I forgot the order. Damairis, my next. Okay, awesome. Oof. Y'all in these questions. I'll start with the exclusion. The moments that I felt excluded. Was this in pertain like excluded from the community or just however I interpret this?
However you want to define exclusion.
Okay, boss. So a lot of the exclusion, I would say, came from my community when I didn't know certain things about my community. My Samoan identity was what was the most prominent for me growing up. My Native Hawaiian side wasn't as accessible. And so although I put Native Hawaiian identity on all my scholarships, because many. I didn't yet have the chance to really walk that path until grad school. But growing up, I didn't speak the language. My parents didn't want to teach us Samoan because my mom's experience in the K through 12 when she immigrated from Samoa was they put her in a special needs class. She was very ostracized, you know, a very disheartening and common, unfortunately, story for immigrant parents. And because of that, she didn't want to teach us the language. We knew when we were in trouble, and we knew our foods, and that was the extent of our language. And I remember in high school when I was trying to learn the Polynesian dances, specifically a Samoan dance from my cousin, she would make fun of me of like, how could you not know this? Why do your hands look like that? Why do you pronounce words like this and like that? So it felt very othering. And at time I felt like a bad Samoan, like I was shaming all of the ancestors who had come before me and just not being good enough. From that moment to now, I have redefined my Samoan and Hawaiian identity to what it means to me. And I've been able to do that. And I'm going to flip it to the question of where I feel the most belonging is in my chosen family. Whether that's my professional chosen family, my beloved chosen family, and some of my chosen family do include my blood relatives, but for the most part, my chosen family have kept me grounded. They allowed that space for me to grow, to ask those questions. They connected me with those different resources and never yucked my yum, if that makes sense. That's one of my favorite norms whenever I go into different spaces, because I'll come into a space and just share a really exciting thing. And if it's in a more familial space with blood relatives, sometimes it's like, you didn't already know that already? You didn't know that song, or you didn't know that, or you didn't know that dance. But with my chosen family, we're all excited about it together. You know, we're all learning and building those pieces together. I also identify as a secular humanist. I am very connected with my ancestors. I talk to them all the time, but I have yet to find another Samoan, Hawaiian, or Polynesian who is also a secular humanist atheist like myself. And that has also been very lonesome at times. Whenever I'm, you know, going through any kind of hardships, the answer for my community is pray about it, talk to God about it, do this, that, and the other. And does it always work for me? And having that connection and communicating that to them has also been difficult, because then it comes back of like, but all Samoans are Catholic, or all Samoans are Christian, or all, and it's very generalizing of like, but we all do this, so you should also do this. And for the folks who know me, I have never been well, if everyone's doing it, I'm gonna do it kind of person. I've always been big on making waves, and I see one of my past supervisors in the has joined the chat. So hello, I'm not going to call you out, but hi. But he's able to speak volumes into to how I've gone into different spaces and made it my own. If there was something that didn't feel right, didn't sit right with me, and I'm very in tuned with myself, I voice it. I make that known that something needs to change, something's off. And it's easy to do that in a non-Polynesian arena, but the moment I take it back to culture, immediately it's like your attack against Samoan and Hawaiians. And that's not the case. You know, colonization had an impact on our histories. That access to, or lack of access to, my Native Hawaiian side was purposeful. There was an entire history that made that happen. I'm finally at a place where I can go out and start, you know, bringing back those building blocks so I can re-examine and redefine what that looks like for me. And the best moment that I've been able to do that, like I said earlier, is with my chosen family. And for any Polynesians out there who are also figuring it out, I'd love to connect with you. Please know you're not alone. We can definitely have these really tough, these taboo conversations together. And it's important for us to customize and define these identities that hold so much weight on our hearts to make it our own. And regardless of but everyone does this, as long as you're individualistic and that identity you choose, however fluid it is, makes you feel wholesome, then that is your definition of whatever that is. I hope I answered your question, Damairis.
Yeah, thanks so much for this question. I've been thinking about like how best to distill sort of an answer, and I don't want to bring down the room, but I also want to keep it real, right? I think a lot of what Tasneem and Kolini have mentioned have really resonated. But I think in the way that I understand my own story, and this is not to like be like sad or like, but it is a reality that I think so much of my early life experience was exclusion. Like I can't just distill in one sort of, singular moment that truly encaptures the different kinds of varied experiences in which I can be and have been, excluded. And it's only until like now, as I turn 30 in a couple of weeks, that, I've finally been able to sort of build, in coalition and chosen family and community, my own sort of spaces of connection. I'm still working on that, right? But I think that a lot of also how I understand myself is direct sort of, impact from that, from, being like one of 2 or 3, Asian kids in, the cafeteria in the Midwest. Being responsible for knowing things across Asia that aren't my culture, or even being responsible for having to know my own cultural, histories without actually knowing my cultural history, right? And finding people scoffing at like, well, why don't you speak your home language? Or, scoffing at like, what is that you brought for lunch? And having to be ashamed of that. And then trying to find, navigate and find spaces, right? There are tons of, Christian groups in my hometown. And, I wanted to be a good Christian boy for a while. Much to the chagrin of my friends, I was once a Christian athlete in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I am neither a Christian nor an athlete, but I tried to make that really work. Right. But at some point, as I started to express, sort of diverging understanding of gender expression and, in my sexuality and my understanding of that, there just wasn't space for that. Right. And I spent a lot of time feeling lost or feeling as if I could only present in the way that you posed the question, Damairis, like just part of myself. And there was a sort of fracturing and splintering of it. And that was really challenging and hard for a long time, to feel comfortable integrating those different parts of myself that to one community is completely fine, but to another is just abhorrent or deviant or strange or weird, and I like to own the weirdness now, right? But those were pejoratives, right? Growing up, those were things that didn't feel great because all I wanted to do was fit in somewhere, And so I think that speaks a lot to the way that we've organized ourselves and that organized our spaces, right? And in the way in which that we make space or not for that kind of self-expression. I will say that, and I rode this ship for a long, long time, that one of the spaces I felt most included was actually in academic spaces in school. I hugged the school institution for a long time because guess what? I may be a bad Christian for different reasons, not, within my control. I may be a bad Asian, for different reasons beyond my control, but I could be a good student, right? I could write good papers. I could show like the knowledge that I've learned and, and really impact that. And so I really leaned into it. And that's how I became the first human doing. Right, was that like, well, I'm gonna just sort of separate myself out from these backgrounds, these histories, displace myself from those social addresses for the time being, because my merit and the understanding of my personhood shouldn't be based on any of those things, right? I really leaned into that narrative. And then I became the workaholic that, Kolini talks about, of like, just being so married to that work, because it was this idea of like, I can contribute here. I belong so long as I am productive, right? It's that like a little bit of that toxic, capitalist sort of productivity culture, but it gave me space. It gave me like a chance to rest from a sense of, exclusion. And so while it's not healthy for me now, right, it was adaptive at the time. And I'm not justifying that insofar as like, that's a great solution, but it's what I did. And it gave me the space to be like, to notice the other points of disconnection of why can it be that I can have these amazing contributions, and why can't I also still be Asian, Indonesian in the way that I am? And why can't I still celebrate the foods that I eat and the people that I love and the way that I express my gender, those kinds of things. Those things can be true too. In terms of where I find inclusion. I'm still, sort of answering that. And again, it's the work in progress, the whip, that is, my experiences. I will say though, that they happen in smaller spaces. I don't feel like I have to manage my expression as much when it's like, I've lived in, I lived in many, many different parts of the country now, but in Philly, I lived in giant row homes with like 10 or 12 people at a time, and in plurality with different backgrounds and all under the sun. That was a great, healthy space for me. I didn't feel like I needed to hide anything. I really couldn't because they lived with me. Same thing in Hawaii. I had grown a community of folks there that I also lived with. And so I've always had, this sort of, the privilege and honor of cultivating housing, sort of shared housing communes almost, in and of themselves, with people with different backgrounds, different expertises and things. And to the building of the World House that we're, kind of convened to talk about, I think that I would love that spirit in that short, between us 10 people. I would love for everybody else to feel that, and so I'm sure we'll get to that later, but I think that means a lot about what we need to do about the house we've built so far, right? So, yeah.
Thank you all. There's a lot of important topics that I hear amongst you all that are kind of playing off of each other or being echoed. So what I really hear is this exclusion or othering from people of your culture, right? That somehow on the spectrum of like whatever culture you're a part of, like for Kolini, it was the fact that you weren't Samoan enough. And then on the other side, you're just seen as like super American. There's this wide spectrum, and it feels like a neither here nor there situation. Like you have to live in both spaces. And the way that I heard of this growing up was that, losing your culture is you becoming whitewashed. And just recently, within the last couple of years, I've figured out for myself that I don't feel like something is washing away. I feel instead like I am evolving. I'm moving forward. And it's almost of no choice of my own. But I feel like that's a better way to frame the conversation. And there's also, because this is a fairly new identity, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Desi American, that there's not enough language or comfort around, I guess, like our identity. When I was in college, no one could talk to me beyond like the model minority myth, especially like in academic spaces. That's all I would get to know. But I think we're in a good space where that's evolving. The next question is in line with this frame of thinking, that given the vastness of the APIDA community, what are some unique challenges that make it difficult to show solidarity and accountability? And how does the vastness of the community unite or divide our efforts? Huge question. I'm gonna stall for time a little bit here. But when it's time to answer, it's gonna go Kolini, Devin, Tasneem. Yeah, I feel like there's a conversation also happening around gender that's kind of jumping around, and I'd like to get to that later on. So Kolini, whenever you are ready, what are the challenges of our community when it comes to building the World House? It's a huge house. It's huge. Give us your wisdom.
I feel as though a challenge is we're not very good at looking within and fixing within. It's very easy to point and say that's broken, that's bad, that's wrong, this, that, the other. But then when that lens kind of flips around, it's like, I don't do that. What do you mean? But no, I love everyone. And then you're in a space where you feel uncomfortable, and it's like, but that's not right. That's not what, and it gets very muddy. I think it's no one's fault other than we're I feel like conditioned to cope instead of thrive. And with all of the impact history has on our cultures and our identities, all of the surviving that we had to do, there wasn't enough time to process it and heal. A lot of times healing can be a privilege because healing takes time. And healing looks different across the board. But the moment we're able to recognize that there are parts of ourselves that do need to heal, that do need to be addressed, I feel as though when we can, that would be the time where we can fully contribute, fully show up for the world house. And it's not to say that if you're not there, you can't contribute. You can still contribute. There are always little things, and everyone can bring their own little brick to build that grander picture, that grander structure. But allowing us to be our most authentic self going into that space would make that journey a lot more fulfilling and a lot more authentic. And I think I said the same thing twice just now, but can you repeat the question? Did I miss anything else? You asked a lot of questions and my ADHD said, What was the last thing you said?
That was perfect. Keep going. Yes, and.
Okay, cool, great, awesome. I'll bounce off of my fellow panelists as they share as well.
Yeah, I think before I get to the harder question, I do want to just sort of like echo Kolini, and that like I think that there that healing component is really important, right? And that self-work, right? I love my family very dearly, but I grew up with a lot of anti-Blackness, right, in the family, like I'll name that. And I came up like, in trying to figure out where I fit in, right? One of like, anti-Blackness is currency in some places in the South, right? And that is a safe sort of connection point. It's a harmful one, right? But it is a safe one, nonetheless, for folks in that space. And I think that like having the experiences and leaving that space and doing the work, right, of understanding that implicit bias and undoing some of the discriminatory harms that I had sort of participated in way back when, it was an important part of like also connecting and finding where I was, right? I think to the question of the house, like I think that the world house should be very large. I think the one that we've been given is a shack. It's a very, I think, limited shack built by very few specific people on the planet, which is why we have to put ourselves under huge umbrellas. The APIDA community, the LGBTQIA+, like, we all have to fit it under umbrellas instead of, being housed by the house itself, right? And so back to your question, I think that part of the challenge of solidarity is I want to cultivate a sense of solidarity for everyone, not in a colorblindness sort of manner, but that I think that, what's the phrase from, it's like to each person according to individual need, right? That like everyone should be allowed to be recognized for those needs and have them met, right? But we can't do that if we're stuffing ourselves under umbrellas. Like my experiences, right, as a first generation American, with like Indonesian and Papua New Guinean like roots, like is a completely sort of different sort of piece to Kolini's experiences, Tasneem's experiences, right? But we are all sort of responsible for each other now as an umbrella. And I think there are benefits to that too. But I think then that it also, I think that people feel this pressure to become culturally competent. And I think it's a big ask for anyone to be culturally competent in someone else's culture. To be, I think that's where we get issues of like, stay in your lane and don't tell other people's stories and, this kind of thing. And I think that if we did a lot more of teaching cultural humility and listening and in question asking, right? Like just knowing what questions to ask and how to have a conversation discussion, you get so much further with cultivating that solidarity that we need without having to have us be responsible for other folks in the umbrella, because there's just, I think the plurality, I don't know, I'm lacking words this evening at 6 p.m. But all this to say that like I think that we get better further if we didn't have to be responsible for telling each other stories. in that way to the mainstream, if that makes sense. And I think that's, for me, one of the greatest sort of like challenges, because you know, in any one particular space, right? Like I identify as like a gay, like non-binary person, right? Suddenly, like, people also ask me questions about the trans experience that I do not have, right? Or in other spaces, right? As just a general brown person, right? People are asking me other questions about the Black experience, you know, and in wanting to do due diligence to that and not misrepresent, right? I feel, you know, early on in my work, I felt like I needed to like read up on everything and, you know, give facts and figures and like give resources and things like that. And, you know, I think that there's a way to be in that solidarity without having to take up space from someone else in that way. So, so more on how we get rid of the shack so we can make room for a house.
I love that. Let's do it. Get rid of the shack, make room for the house, and build a wonderful, beautiful house that can hold the complexities and the plurality and the differences and the beauty and all of it in it. The vastness. If APDI, no, I'm messing up the acronym. Almost there. I know A comes at the end. APIDA. Did I get that? Okay, perfect. So if that is a vast identity or block for the house in general, I think the Desi community itself is super vast. Like, I'm Muslim, but you know, religiously speaking, there are so many religions that are represented, and seculars and atheists and all of that as well represented in the Desi community. And it's interesting because I'll only speak for myself as a Muslim because that's where my experiences lie. There is so much, there's so many silos, right? And I think those silos exist partially because of we're not so good as looking within, partially because of those pressures to culturally be competent and to, you know, fit in and whatnot. But I think there's also a fear of losing yourself if you become open to the other. If you really truly accept someone else's truth as a possibility or their truth, there is this fear that somehow does that mean I have to let go of my own. So I think that fear is real, and we have to talk about that fear in order to get away from those silos and really build the house, you know, that has doors that are open and windows that, you know, have cool breeze coming in versus, I don't know, heat or something else. And I think the other dynamic that I wanna, and I don't know how much to get into, but that combination, there are three things that I feel come up in general in my community, the Desi community in general, the very vast community. The pressure to assimilate, the pressure, the real concern for safety, and then that self wrestling that I think all three of us have spoken about around identity and our own sense of belonging and what feels right and who am I being and how can I be myself in the community that I care about so much. So I think those three things together make it a really complicated sauce to kind of enjoy the different foods with. I don't know about that analogy. It's foods. Sorry, I have no idea if that meant.
You're doing great. You're doing great. I can't wait to talk about food later. It's dinner time.
Yeah.
There's something really cool that happened just now, and it felt like Devin was echoing something about cultural humility, and it reminds me of what Tasneem had said about her workplace, your workplace, in the way that you are able to openly ask questions and openly explore. There's something else that I took away from Tasneem, is that like the fear of losing oneself. I think that's a very common conversation, especially in interfaith, that people are scared to even engage with it because they're scared of like being converted in whatever way. But you know, the studies have shown that by engaging in interfaith, it strengthens your own identity, whatever that is, whether that's, you know, fluid, or it's secular or spiritual, whatever it is. I feel it's a non-starter, really. So with all of that in mind, in thinking about cultural competency and almost like a sense of like responsibility that people feel towards like building the world's house, and especially like a lot of what Devin had said, what are some actual actionable and practical steps that you think people can take when they want to get into the movement, if that makes sense? Does it go beyond education? Does it stop there? What does it look like in practice? And for this round, let's do Devin, Kolini, and then Tasneem.
Sure, thanks. Well, I'm just gonna go off the cuff here. What is it like? Can you phrase that one more time? I just want to make sure I.
Sure thing. What are some actionable steps that people can do to support the APIDA community specifically, but then possibly the movement in general, to be a what we call like a good ally, for the lack of a better term? I think I like the idea of more like someone accompanying you, like in the movement, rather than ally, because it's almost like a badge of honor. Accompaniment, I think in music, is you are playing in harmony together. So I like that phrasing a little better. What would you recommend for someone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it, you know, and this also comes from, you know, just in my general sort of professional background that I work in, that learning to listen and learning how to ask are such challenging skills. And it's partially because we, no matter where we are in the world, right, we're you know, from childhood, we're socialized in a space where it's this expectation of you will grow competency. So, you know, like you will grow to be like independent. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, right? But what I am saying is that we don't start with, you know, lessons of like, well, how do you like just listen, observe in the space, understand what's going on first before you jump in? How do you start to ask? How do you not feel embarrassed to ask? How do you, you know, navigate maybe the social awkwardness of like, okay, I don't know anything about this. You know, I think that there are folks who just don't participate at all because they feel like they can't, right? Because they don't know how to ask. They don't know how to approach a space, right? There's a sort of like almost displaced lack of embodiment for like how to, you know, like watching like, you know, a white person enter H Mart for the first time and looking at all the vegetables is such an interesting experience. Absolutely, absolutely. And I love it because like, you know, it's like my showtime. It's like, here are the vegetables, here are the things I eat. And, you know, it's like, it's wonderful. It's a sharing moment. And I think that if you cultivate that sort of spirit of open inquiry, curiosity, right, and sharing, right, at the heart of it, that's, I think, where it starts, right? In terms of a praxis, that's where it follows from there. Then you're going to start to understand what that person in that side of the community understands as an accomplice, how you play in harmony, right? But you've got to be able to learn how to read the music first. If we're going to continue with that extended metaphor, right? You've got to learn how to be able to read the music first. And that music is going to be notated differently for different folks in different communities. So that's one. Two, there are just so many resources, right? And I think that people, like, we're in an information age overload, right? And I think that people have like, never before have I ever seen like such immense access to information, and yet like the reluctance to like move forward with it, right? And I think that in like a more actionable sort of sense, are sort of like, you know, school institutions, I think could really help out in this as well, in and teaching some manner of digital literacy and how to get and navigate through the different resources. Again, it's a question asking activity. It's being critical of who wrote this piece, whose perspective is this, like what story is it telling, what am I getting out of this, how do I interpret it, how do other people interpret it? Like those are all key skills, I think, in developing accompliceness, is that the word? Accompaniment in the movement, in the space, right? You can't play the movement without that. So I'll leave it at that.
To continue what Devin shared, absolutely do your research, but find accurate resources and resources that were from that community. There's been a lot of text, a lot of theories that were written by people outside of the community looking in, but we're at a time where there have been enough trailblazers in the field who have contributed to those different theories and found their own story and embedded it within that. A great example is critical race theory. Critical race theory has a lot of different aspects that highlight a lot of different identities. There's Lat crit, there's Asian crit, there's tribal crit, there's even Kanaka Oiwi crit and Kanaka Maoli crit. And Kanaka Oiwi crit is the theory I used for my own thesis. And that one was founded by Aaron Kahunavai Wright. But these are great examples of different theories that impact the community that a lot of higher ed groups, people who are just curious, are doing research on, but using theories that do not align with that organization or do not align with that community. So as you're going through your research, look for the right source, and be cognizant of the language that's used. A lot of times when the history is laid out, it's written at a point of view that isn't very accurate. It'll minimize whatever that experience is. And a memory that comes to mind is the plaque that's in front of Iolani Palace. If y'all ever travel through Oahu, Iolani Palace has a plaque that talks about the history that went on those grounds. But it's a very palatable explanation. It doesn't talk about how the Committee of Safety, a bunch of white men were upset, a bunch of business white men were upset with Hawaiians. They wanted to overthrow, they did overthrow the queen. They imprisoned Queen Liliuokalani. And I know that isn't, forming that and fitting it on a plaque might not be the easiest thing, but to not acknowledge the truth that went down on those grounds also does a disservice. It continues to perpetuate this narrative of everything's okay, we have all shaken hands, and we're thumbs up, A-okay, best friends now. And that's not the case. If it's so difficult for me to have access to my culture, then that is not the case. The goal way back when continues today. And when our, how do we call them? Not allies, but accomplices find themselves in these different spaces, be cognizant of how much space you take and how much space you make. That is not a moment for you to make it about yourself and to ask the community to teach you about why you're wrong or what things you need to fix. That's a you problem. You need to sit down with yourself, have that conversation, reflect, do what you need to do. And also intent versus impact. Are you in this space or in that community, in that dialogue, to go back and say, look what I did, I checked that off, diversity? No, if that is the case, then you are there for the wrong reason. Again, sit with yourself, have that moment, reflect. Why are you doing this? How are you weaponizing your privilege? How are you using it to support these communities? Because privileges are very, very real, regardless of your background, and how we use it entering a space, whether it's to support a community or whether it's to support ourselves, what have you, can speak volumes. It can build up towards something, or it can tear whatever that coalition is down. So hit up Google, find the right resources, and as I shared, ask who is this story written for? Who is this written by? And who were used for these different stories, research theories, what have you, because all of that can point you towards the direction of, is this an accurate source? Or do I need to go and support and find more resources that better align or better represent the community, organization, whatnot?
I love going at the end because then I can take from both the Kolini and Devin. And something I want to take from Devin is the humility and the asking questions, and something from sorry, I did I say, I said Devin, right? Okay. And then from Kolini, I want to take the importance of acknowledgement, how important it is to create space to acknowledge. And something that I want to offer that's tangible is actually a tool by Resetting the Table. So I want to give credit to where it's due. They specialize in facilitating dialogue over political differences. And they call something called follow the meaning. So when Kolini is talking about be cognizant of how much space you are taking or making, there is a place for asking curious questions, and I think curiosity is awesome. I welcome it. But curious questions is when you want to know something, you want to understand something, you want to explore something. So it's focused on the speaker, like the questioner, right? Follow the meaning questions, which is something Resetting the Table teaches, are questions that follow the meaning of the speaker. So what really matters to them? Ask more questions to understand their experience based on what is important to them, what matters to them. And I think that distinction between those two questions has been really powerful, because there are times where I'm like, I'm curious, tell me more. And there are other times when it's not appropriate. And you can be like, okay, I have questions because I can see this is meaningful to you, and I want to know more if you will be willing to share. And I think the humility piece that came up earlier is super duper important. We can't be so afraid of messing up that we don't show up and don't express care and compassion. And I think one way of showing care and compassion and being courageous as well is by going beyond the labels. So if we're really going to impact movement beyond one-on-one conversations or spaces, I think we really have to expect and embrace and invite the diversity and the differences that exist in our communities, and not assume that one label will capture it all, because it doesn't. Just earlier today, and I do some work in do some work in schools K through 12, looking to create more space for spirituality and religion in the DEI work that's happening in schools. And even amongst ourselves, we can't agree to what spirituality looks like, what religion really means. And we want to be inclusive of people who don't affiliate with a religion or spirituality, but still we want to understand where they're from and give them the space to say, I don't know, or I know this, or I think this, or I feel this. And it's so powerful to not be afraid of speaking up and creating space for others to speak up because you don't have the language. Just say, I don't have the language, and this is my intention, right? This is why I'm wanting to have the conversation nonetheless. So I think that's what I would say.
If I may add, I think another great way is attending more talks like this. Tahil and Dr. Wagner have a lot more conversations. I know Tahil's going to add a plug about it later, but conversations like this is rare. I didn't have a dialogue like this growing up. I didn't have a panel like this growing up. And we ourselves are trailblazers in these moments because we're paving a space that is brand new and we're able to just build the next foundation for the group coming up behind us. And so to continue in that work, in those efforts, thank you all, our panelists, but also our attendees for being here, because that is doing the work. So thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Kolini, because I remember when I was a senior at the University of Laverne, I had tried to do a panel like this, focusing on the intersection of like the APIDA community and the queer community. And I had 3 people show up and leave after the first 10 minutes. And then it was literally just me and my queer identifying professor friends just going back and forth, like asking each other questions. But I still like, a part of me still considers that event a success because we built our bonds and we came away with something from that event. I feel like I should throw you guys a softball. This is our second to last question before we have to wrap up and open up the Q&A. But I feel like this is a question like a lot of brown people get is just like recommendations for like art forms, books, literature, music, things from your culture. And so it's almost unfair that I'm asking you all, but I can start first because I really felt a kinship with Ocean Vuong. And he had this quote in his book. I think it's on Earth We're Briefly Beautiful or something like that. But there's a quote, and he's Vietnamese American. He's queer. A lot of it seems fictional, but almost autobiographical about his relationship with his mom. And his mom's name in the book is my mom's name in real life. So it just like freaked me out. And I was like, oh, I could have written this in another life. But then there's this quote that says, all this time I told myself we were born from war. But I was wrong, Ma. We were born from beauty. Let no one mistake us for the fruit of violence. But that violence, having passed through the fruit, failed to spoil it. So that's mine. Let's go in order of, let's go Tasneem, Devin, and then Kolini.
Oh, shoot. I was hoping you wouldn't do that.
I know. You like being last too much.
Confession.
Too much.
Confessions, talking about humility and acknowledgement. These things do not come to me right away. So I'm like looking like, what is it? And actually, I wanted to highlight one that's not from my own tradition, but it's Asian. And I remember the author's name. So point being, can you come back to me in a sec until I get the name?
Yeah, is anyone else ready? Is anyone else ready for me?
Don't worry, Tasneem. I'm in the same boat. I'm
Okay,
thinking
cool.
yeah, because it's been a while since I've like, this is gonna sound really dumb. It's been a while since I have really digested popular culture in a little bit.
What are you digesting? Are you digesting
I'm working on my
podcasts,
dissertation.
zines? What do you got?
I'm working on my dissertation. So I've got, so most of my reading is academic, which is not always the most accessible thing, unfortunately, which is a problem, right? I will say that I did read the first couple of chapters of Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, I think who's the lead singer of Japanese Breakfast. And that is there's a great scene in which she's talking about, she's framing her mother has passed, right, at the point in the book, at the beginning of the book. And she's framing her understanding and her sense memory of her mother through a walk through H Mart and like the foods she enjoys. And that's like the one thing, like I'm not Korean, right? But that's the one thing I do have of my culture is, even though I can't cook it, like I have the tongue of an Indonesian, right? Like I have that embodiment, if that makes sense. It's I have an appreciation for all those foods. So as she walks through and talks about all of those memories, like some of the dishes are different, but I think like the experience of coming and convening around a dinner table around sort of my Indonesian family sensibility about what family dinner means and that institution in our daily lives it very much resonates. So I would definitely recommend that. And then if anybody else just like wants to like understand the rest of my tongue in Indonesian, Miriam Bellina, who is like pop ballad singer of the 80s and 90s, like you'll understand what I was growing up with then, if you want to connect and are a fan of you know, ballad singers.
Can I add one more that I just remembered?
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once slaps. Unapologetically slaps. It's absurd, but it also perfectly represents the diaspora and the fracturedness that we have been talking about, the intersectionality, all of that. Fantastic, perfect movie, A+. No notes, as they say. All right, Kolini, Tasneem, any recommendations?
For songs, I would say Israel Kuzma Ole's Hawaii 78 is a really big one. I can't get through that song without crying. A really big lyric that comes out to me is when he was saying, like, how would the kings and queens feel if on sacred lands there are hotels and roads, and I'm swapping the lyrics a little bit, but that was the essence of, like, how would they feel? You know, how are we going to be our most authentic selves? And then some books, and I'll go ahead and throw them in the chat, are From a Native Daughter, Colonialism and Sovereignty in Hawaii by Haunani K. Trask. I love Haunani K. Trask. She rips everyone a new one to be if that was the summary, that's how I would say that. But she lets the truth have it regardless of the systems at play. She was a faculty person at University of Hawaii, and all of the I lost all of the right words to say this, but all of the messed up things that the University of Hawaii did to Hawaiians, to Haunani K. Trask, to try to eliminate any kind of cultural teachings, she calls them out on all of it, and she calls them out every single time, unapologetically, and I love it. And then the second book is Kanaka Oiwi Methodologies, Mo'olelo and Metaphor, and again, I'll put that in the chat as well. And that is also just the collection of different theories by Native Hawaiian, Kanaka Oiwi, Kanaka Maoli scholars and academia. They bring in all of the different parts of the Hawaiian identity to make sure that everything about it is authentic through and through. It's a really, really great resource as well. So I'll go ahead and add those to the chat.
Okay, for whatever it's worth, I'm gonna say this one. So this book, The Minority Experience by Adrian Pai. So again, not my particular Desi community, but I don't know, I actually did read that book almost cover to cover, and it spoke highly to me in terms of, I think, just resonated. So many of the things that he brought up around fitting into the American community as a minority. I think it spoke to me both as a Muslim and as a Desi. So again, I don't know if this counts or not, but if you're into love, romance kind of a thingy, there is this book called Inshallah Love, and there's a book called Inshallah Salam. They're two different books. So Inshallah Love is a collection of real life stories, submissions from Muslim women talking about love, all the way from women who identify very religiously to those who are not religious, those who are grappling with it, LGBT and all of that. And Inshallah Salam is from Muslim men talking about their experiences. So if you're just wanting to get a flavor for what it's like, I think it really represents a wide variety. And the final one, I'll just say, again, for whatever it's worth, is Miss Marvel, the TV show that came out recently, the first Pakistani Muslim superhero. I've heard mixed reviews about it in terms of actual Marvel series, and apparently it has some holes and stuff, but I actually appreciate it quite a bit as a cultural thing. And for once, my parents watched it with me, and I read several comments by people in my community. It was just something powerful to see the Indian Pakistani community Muslim identity being represented like that, and a lot of it resonated in a positive way, including the partition stories and the whole the deep dive they took in the India-Pakistan divide. So
thank you all. That was a very self-indulgent question. I'll be looking at your recommendations sometime in the near future. At this point, we'd like people, if they're able to write into the chat, just an evaluation. What are you taking away? What are you learning right now? And while they're answering that, I'd like to finish off with our last question. What wisdom would you like to share from your tradition or value systems that help you stay engaged in this work? And for this final question, let's go Kolini, Tasneem, and then Devin.
I nominate Devin to go first.
Sure, I can start us off. Well, so as the displaced person among a bunch of different sort of competing cultural groups, I will say that these are more like hard-earned wisdoms, just kind of having to navigate that. What I will say is I'll bring a little nuance to what I mean by cultural humility. And I think it's this, is that there are so many ways to solve a problem, right? And I think that so often we grow up thinking that there can only be one way, or there is a right way and a wrong way, right? And I have the sort of like compassion to believe that the wrong ways, right, are maladaptive in certain conditions, certain spaces, certain environments, right? That's why people are like, don't do that because you might get hurt, right? I'd like to believe that at some, like core instance, a lot of these, we may not understand where they came from now, right? But that at some place there was a reason that, there were prohibitions for certain solutions to a problem, right? You're hungry, you can eat this, you can't eat that. Why? Maybe there was an early reason, and now, it's just part of, sort of the tradition. But I think that having and maintaining an openness to understanding, and that's where the cultural humility part comes in, is that your way is not the only way. Right, and that there's so many other ways to be, to exist, to live, to behave. I think is one of the core sort of lessons that I continue to teach myself. That I think is important in navigating. And then I will also leave with that I think that we really need to get behind committing to the values that we purport. Right, I think that when you come to a space with your true self, don't claim values you don't have, right? And commit to the ones you do claim you have, right? Live up to those values. I think that like so much of my experience was challenging insofar as there were so many people that led me to believe that I needed to be a certain way in order to fit a certain set of values, right? And then again, back to the cultural humility piece, that's just not true, right? That being a truthful, honest, moral human can look a number of different ways because we all come from such different experiences and different contexts. So yeah, and I will say that the other sort of last piece to this, back to the world house, I really do believe, right, from again, academic language, like we're living in the social imaginary of the white man, right? Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This shack was like, it's got a secret elevator in it where they like go up, and they've got like this beautiful like penthouse that they watch us like under umbrellas battle it out for like space under the shack. And I think that like we can't move forward, right, unless we really address the system of the shack. We can't move forward unless we alter incentive structures. Right? I don't want to live in the shack. I don't want room in the shack. I don't want room at their table. I want to make one with everyone else, right? So that we understood like that we all built this table together, and that there will always be space, that we're not just trying to clamor for space. So that's where I'll leave things. Hopefully everybody else has had time to think.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah.
Excellent. Just like we rehearsed. I would say move away from the binary, move away from binary thinking. It's not this or that. It can be this and that, and those, all of these other things, you know, throw it away. I would also suggest to create a space that you wish you would have had when blank, whatever that looks like. If you are in a position to do so, whether it's just yourself or it's just you and your chosen family, you and a few colleagues, us in this space, creating whatever that world, whatever that community looks like in those brief few moments, regenerate whatever energy you were looking for. Even if it's a super, super long event, because you showed up as your authentic self, everyone else was able to show up as their authentic selves. There's no energy lost. It's just refueled. And a lot of times in activism work, we forget to refuel ourselves. We're very big on just, all right, going on to the next front line, to the next front line. Let's start this campaign, move here, move there. But we forget to take a moment to not only celebrate ourselves, celebrate the people who are with us, celebrate the people who've come before us, the people who are going to join us in the future, whatever it is. So take all those different moments, celebrate the big wins, celebrate the little wins, and reach out to folks for support. I love to build my community of guidance. If this doesn't, I like to introduce myself also as I'm a Pisces Sun, Gemini Moon. So if that means anything to you, it means maybe you understand me even better now. But my interpretation is, while I'm also empathetic, I can cuss someone out real quick. It just flips. But because of that, I surround myself with people, mainly water signs, who can also reciprocate that back, not only keep me grounded. Kolini, you took that too far, take it down a few notches, but then also hype me up, because you know we need our hype team to remind ourselves that we are fucking badass. I went a whole event without cussing, Sahil. I just did at the end, it's fine. But last but not least, I want to say that I see you, I am proud of you, and I love you. And please reach out if there's anything that I can do to support. I'm happy to be a sounding board. As I shared in my introduction, I'm still figuring things out. You know, I do not have the answers, and I will be the first and quickest person to say that is not me. But we can go along this journey of exploration together, this voyage, if you will. Come on through, Moana Motunui. So let me know what I can do to support, and yeah, just continue being you.
Okay. I love that. Woohoo. So earlier today I was at a Buddhist temple, and I was talking to one of the monks there, and he was from Malaysia, and he shared how he grew up amongst a lot of Muslims in Malaysia, but the Muslims over there, or in his experience, he said something along the lines of, you know, it was illegal for them to basically not be Muslim or to convert to another religion or something like that. And it made me sad. It made me sad because for me, religion, and it's in the Quran actually, that there is no compulsion in religion. And the sense of compulsion, like you must be this way or you must be that way, makes me really sad. I think it's the opposite of everything that Kolini and Devin were describing and advising to do. And so I go back to the verse in the Quran that really grounds me and inspires me and moves me to do the work that I do. And it basically says that, "O mankind, we created you from a single male and female into different nations and tribes so that ye may get to know one another." And usually people stop at that line because it's it's an acknowledgement and embracing of diversity, right? Like, we're different, get to know one another. But the second part of that verse is saying something to the lines of effect of, and the most noble or the best, the most righteous of you is the one that's best in conduct, that's most compassionate, that's most like that's good. So if we really want to get to know one another, if we really want to embrace that diversity that we have, and create that table and create all of that, we really have to be our best selves and create space and opportunity for others to be themselves, and to know that that is the true match. Like, that's where the magic lies. That's where the juiciness and the love and the joy lies, is when we have that space to really be our authentic self and get to know one another for who we are authentically. And I think that's when we're being our best selves.
Thank you all. I would recommend everyone just take a look in the chat. There's a lot of lovely testimonies right now about what people are taking away. So just take a time to scroll through that. Now we're gonna go into the Q&A portion of this event, and we're running a little low on time. We have about 7 minutes left. And it looks like, oh, Anthony Reyes, good question. Everyone drop your questions if you have them. We're doing a lightning round Q&A. Anthony asks, panelists, I am curious as to what conversations looked like in your circles following the passing of Queen Elizabeth. Can you share a little bit on how you processed this event, considering the colonial efforts that occurred in her name? And whoever wants to answer this question, just jump right in.
Can we get security to go ahead and escort that person out of
Sandra.
room? Campus safety, come on through with your golf cart. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I also went to Laverne, and so did the person who asked this wonderful question. How did I process this event? Death is sad. Dying sucks. However, it is not a magic eraser. It does not then humanize years of trauma and terror and just say, renew, you're good, continue on. Everything was rainbow and sunshines and butterflies. For an individual of her stature to be in the power that she had for years and not make as many efforts towards rewriting the wrongs, I feel as though was a huge disservice into what her legacy could have been. If there was intent to, I have learned, I've made a mistake, I'm going to do better, there was plenty of opportunity to do so. I do acknowledge, as I shared, death is bad, death is sad, death sucks. But there's a lot of death from that legacy, from all of that trauma. And those individuals, a lot of them don't even have names. And to think that because that legacy is over, that has all been erased is just, it's harmful. And I'm gonna let my colleagues continue before I go off the deep end here. So jump on in, y'all.
Sure, I can speak. I was actually in the middle of a writing session with some other BIPOC folks when this happened. And so I won't say that we weren't a little bit just elated for the opportunity that this might mean for a systems change, right? That's what we say, and I have the empathy, the capacity, the compassion to feel the sorrow for, you know, someone who was lost, that was a family member, right? That meant a lot to a lot of people within that institution, and was very meaningful. And I share that sorrow. I share that sorrow that we lost another human off the planet, right? I have this, you know, this sadness of, you know, I hope that there was minimal suffering, that I hope that, you know, when they left, that they felt that they left on the terms that they wanted to, right? Which is not always what you see, you know, of folks. But beyond that, that while that is true, that it can also be true that, you know, there is, you know, there's this sort of excitement about what this means moving forward, that is there opportunity for change, right? It's also a space that I felt frustrated, right? Because even in death, she was still colonizing in some capacity. There were people that were not allowed to continue about their daily lives in that location, you know, around that area, because of, you know, this imposed mourning, right? Again, there are different ways that different people handle different situations, and there wasn't room for that, right? They like, I heard that like they quieted the beeping at like grocery stores and markets, like you know, football games were canceled, but apparently not for like, you know, some of the other higher class pieces, you know, like, so there were a lot of sort of spaces in which like restrictions were incurred on the local people that also felt, you know, wrong. You know, if people wanted to participate, they should have been allowed to participate, but if people didn't, they shouldn't have been, you know, sort of implicated in that. And I think for me, that speaks to this whole legacy of the system of power that upheld her as well, right? She is but one individual as part of this, and while she had a lot of, you know, consolidated power to do something about it, I think it also is a great sort of reflection point of everything else that's been built around that, right? So again, I don't want to live in the shack, right? Because once I get in the shack, then I have to obey the shack rules, right? I'd rather build the house with everyone else and agree to the rules that we abide by, right? So.
Nothing much to add. I think it's just important to have the yes and both Kolini and Devin spoke to the yes and, so nothing more to say. But thank you for the question, Anthony. Good to have you. And everyone else, thank you, Bob, for being here and supporting me always.
Thank you. I think we're ending at the perfect time. This is my dream panel. Like I said, we're ending at the perfect time. This is great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening and staying the entire time. This has been a very engaging discussion. Thank you again to Reverend Dr. Zandra Wagner. She was my mentor in college. I have to shout her out. I love working with her. And thank you for Tahil for bringing us all together in one space. I'd like to say a final thank you to our panelists for really showing up, really engaging with these questions, because they are very difficult questions, right? Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Kolini. Thank you, Tasneem, for, you know, just being you in the best way that you can be. The next Building the World House panel will center on Latin voices in the interfaith movement, featuring various University of Laverne alumni and community leaders speaking on similar themes that impact the work of equity and justice. That panel will be on Thursday, October 27th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Panelists, please stay on. We're going to take photos and talk about dinner. Bye, everyone.
It's on the menu, so.
Bye, Bob.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye, take care.
Thank you. Thank you for all the great things that you guys said.